The first time Karen saw the fence, she screamed like someone had stolen her front porch. She came running out in flip-flops and fury, waving her arms and yelling across the gravel like I just bulldozed her flower beds. "You're ruining the view. This is a natural corridor. You can't just put up a wall." I didn't even bother yelling back. I just rested one hand on the cedar post, gave the last bolt a good crank, and looked out at the line of fencing that now ran clean along the ridge, just inside the surveyed property line. My property line. Her voice climbed 3 octaves in 30 seconds. She quoted imaginary bylaws, said I was disrupting the aesthetic harmony of the community. Then she pulled out her phone and started filming. "This fence might look like just another property line," I said, walking calmly toward her, "but it's not what you think. Because when you screamed at me for blocking your view, you didn't realize." I pointed past her backyard. "You were staring at land I already owned." Her jaw dropped. I kept walking. All of it. If I let her win this battle, it wouldn't just be about a fence. It would be about everything. Because once she thinks she can claim the view, she'll start claiming the land. Karen didn't see a fence. She saw a threat to her illusion of control. To her, that open mountain ridgeline behind her house wasn't just scenery. It was a status symbol. Something she pointed out to guests at her wine nights and HOA meetings. "Just look at our view," she'd say, like nature had been installed specifically for her to enjoy, uninterrupted and unchallenged. So when I put up the fence on my own surveyed property line, after verifying easements and livestock boundaries, she lost it. And she didn't stop at yelling. First came the warning notes. Slipped into my gate latch. "This violates neighborhood sight line expectations." Then came the official-looking courtesy notices with the HOA letterhead, complete with a fine schedule for unauthorized perimeter structures. None of it applied to me. I lived outside their jurisdiction. But that didn't stop her from trying. Then she filed a complaint with the county. Accused me of erecting a barrier that disrupted the architectural consistency of the community. Said I was lowering home values. Said the fence created a sense of enclosure in an otherwise free-flowing environment. Her words, "It would have been funny if it weren't so dangerous." Because when HOAs get bold, it's never just about one rule. It's about creating precedent. If I took down the fence, I wouldn't just be giving her back a view that was never hers. I'd be telling her she had authority, that a tantrum could rewrite a boundary, that she could control the land without owning a square inch of it. And I knew if she got away with it, the next move wouldn't be about views. It'd be about zoning, fencing, trails, water access, fire lane rights. Everything I'd built, everything I'd protected, would be open for debate. That's what was really at stake. This wasn't about cedar posts or barbed wire. This was about the line between ownership and obedience. And I didn't plan on moving an inch. I never built the fence to block anyone's view. I built it because the cows kept wandering. The land had been in my family for 3 generations. Before me, it was my uncle's. Before him, my grandfather's. And before that, it was just dirt and sky. Open, unclaimed, wild. My grandfather bought it for practically nothing after the war. Back then, people were moving to cities, not mountains. Nobody wanted a rocky slope covered in cedar and wind. But he did. He saw what most folks didn't. Water from a spring that never ran dry. Soil that softened just enough after the first rain. Trees that bent in storms but never broke. Land with bones. By the time I was old enough to walk behind him, he'd already carved out the foundation for a life that was slow and sturdy. No shortcuts. No machines he couldn't fix with a wrench and a prayer. He built the house by hand. Fence by hand. Dug the well. Cleared the brush. Raised the barn. All of it with sweat and a stubborn belief that if you did something right the first time, you'd never have to explain it later. He died out there, too. In the field, leaning against the fence post, he just reset. Heart gave out. Hands still calloused. I inherited the land 2 years later. I didn't move back right away. I've been working long hours in town, trying to claw my way out of an apartment that always smelled like mildew and old pizza grease. But after he passed, something in me shifted. The city felt too loud, too shallow, too much noise, and not enough meaning. So I packed what I had, left a good job behind, and drove out to the ranch with everything that still mattered. I didn't do it for nostalgia. I did it because the land felt like mine. Not just on paper, but in blood, in breath, in memory. At first, I lived simply. Fixed up the house, cleaned the barn, got a few head of cattle to keep the pasture healthy, planted a garden out back, just like my grandfather did. The days were long, but they made sense. Wake up early, work with your hands, make something, fix something, feed something, sleep like stone. I wasn't hiding from the world. I just didn't need it to validate me. It wasn't until year 2 that I started thinking about the fence. Not to wall anyone out, not to make a statement, just to mark what was mine. The old fencing on the northern boundary had mostly collapsed. The cedar posts were splintered from decades of wind and rot. The barbed wire sagged like loose thread. The cows knew it. So did the coyotes. And when one of my calves went missing, I decided it was time to set things right. So I did what my grandfather would have done. I walked the entire line, pulled the original survey markers from the county office, took notes, measured twice. Then I dug post holes the old way by hand. One every 8 feet. Solid cedar. No concrete. Let the earth hold it. I strung the wire myself. Tight. Clean. Tied off every knot like I meant it. And when I was done, the fence didn't just hold livestock. It stood for something. It wasn't a wall. It was a boundary. A line that said, this is where my responsibility begins, and yours ends. And for a while, that's all it was. Just fence. Just peace. Until the development came. It started quietly, just a few surveyors in neon vests, pacing and flagging the land at the bottom of the ridge. Then came the gravel trucks. Then the machines. Then the sound. That sound of progress. Chainsaws. Jackhammers. Foundation drills. 1 minute you're listening to hawks circle the bluff, and the next minute you're trying to ignore a concrete mixer at sunrise. The land next to mine, 20 acres my uncle had sold off in the 90s, got bought by a developer who didn't understand the land, just the numbers. They called it Silver Ridge Estates, which was funny because there's no silver in the soil, and the only ridge is the one that I own. They bulldozed the meadow, flattened the trees, paved over the slope. Within 6 months, houses started popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Identical beige cubes with fake stone facades and 3-car garages. They planted grass that didn't belong, built fences that bowed in wind, stamped everything with the same blue and white HOA sign at the entrance like it was some kind of brand. At first, I didn't care. Let them build. Let them plant. Let them decorate their mailboxes and fine each other for loud wind chimes. I wasn't part of their world. I was uphill, out of sight, and not even connected to their roads. But it didn't take long before they started noticing me. The first one to wave was a kid, maybe 9 or 10, on a bike. He waved like I was some old cowboy from a storybook. I waved back. Then his dad came out of the garage, saw who he was waving at, and pulled it back inside. That was the first sign. Then came a drone. I heard it before I saw it. High-pitched, whining, dipping low over the tree line like it was mapping something. I spotted the pilot on the other ridge, standing in one of those new backyards. A woman with a phone and a scowl. She didn't wave. That was Karen. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew the type. The kind who thought moving next to wilderness meant she owned the wilderness. The kind who bought into a mountain view, then acted like the mountain owed her something. I didn't think much of her until I noticed her walking the edge of my fence. Not on the HOA side. My side. Not far in, just far enough to look entitled. One hand on her hip, one holding clipboard. Measuring something. I stepped out of the barn. Need help. She looked up, startled, then forced a smile. Oh, just admiring the scenery. Private scenery, I said. She laughed like I was joking. You know, your fence cuts into the view a little. Maybe consider something lower. I blinked. For my cows. She shrugged. Just a thought. We've had some concerns. She turned and walked back down the hill, like she hadn't just suggested that my fence, on my land, was somehow negotiable. Turns out, Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was the HOA president of Silver Ridge Estates. And she was just getting started. I thought the first conversation would be the last. Karen had walked off with that tight, uncomfortable smile people use when they think they've made their point, but I'd assumed she'd drop it after realizing I wasn't the type to fold over optics. My fence was legal, surveyed, built for function, not flair. End of story. But for Karen, that was just the opening scene. The next morning, I woke up to find a laminated note zip-tied to my gate. Full color. Why let the heck? Notice of violation. Unauthorized perimeter structure visible from common property. Not compliant with Silver Ridge Estates community guidelines. Please remove or modify to HOA-approved specifications within 10 business days. It was laughable. My property wasn't in Silver Ridge Estates. Not by plat map, not by taxes, not by zoning. But still, there it was. Their name, their logo, their threat. I brought the notice inside and tossed it on the table. Didn't even bother calling. I figured someone on their board would look at a county boundary and realize they'd made a mistake. But then came an email, and a second laminated notice, and a voicemail from Karen. Hi, this is Karen Whitmore, HOA president for Silver Ridge. We're receiving multiple complaints about the unsightly fence along the northern ridge. We believe it may impact property values, and your structure violates visual unity guidelines. Please reach out immediately. We'd like to resolve this amicably. Visual unity? I was ready to let slide. Just one more paper tiger blowing in the wind. But then she showed up again. It was a Saturday. I was working on the barn roof, patching hail damage, when I saw her SUV crunch into the gravel along the edge of her development. She stepped out with that same clipboard, a yellow measuring wheel, and this time, 2 other people trailing behind her. One wore a neon vest like he was an inspector. The other held a camera. They walked right up to the fence. Didn't knock. Didn't call out. Just started walking the property line. I climbed down from the roof and approached, keeping calm. You folks lost. Karen turned around, all confidence and cologne. We're conducting a visual impact survey. On my land. We're on the community side. I pointed to the flagged post a foot behind her. That's my line. You're 6 steps over. She scowled. We're within right of way. No, you're not. And you know it. The guy with the vest cleared his throat awkwardly. I was told this was common property. It's not, I said. And if you've got that camera pointed at my buildings, that's private surveillance on private land. Karen didn't flinch. We have a right to assess structures that affect adjacent parcels. Your fence is obstructing multiple view corridors. I stared at her, trying to decide if she was quoting a real document or just making it up on the fly. I built a fence, I said, for cattle, within my line, according to county code. You don't have a say in it. She leaned closer. It disrupts the mountain aesthetic. I laughed. You moved next to a working ranch. What were you expecting? Binoculars and silence. She crossed her arms. People bought homes here for the view. You're damaging value. That fence is a nuisance. Nuisance? It's not in harmony with the environment. It looks aggressive. It keeps my cows in. It looks like a prison wall. It's 5 feet of cedar and barbed wire. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just trying to get me to take the fence down. She was trying to control the horizon. She had built a life on the illusion of untouched nature. Rolling hills, open ridges, wind through the pines. And now that illusion had a boundary. A line that reminded her the world didn't bend to her preference. So she escalated. She called a special board meeting and sent me a formal invite. I didn't go. They sent minutes anyway. Under old business, it read, Item 3, non-compliant ranch fencing and the obstruction of scenic harmony. Board agreed to submit formal complaint to county office. Enforcement discussion pending legal review. Legal review? I called the county myself. They laughed, said no complaint had been filed, and if it had, it wouldn't have gone far. She thinks HOA law trumps property law, the clerk said. It doesn't. Still, the next week, 2 more notices arrived, this time citing made-up violations like ambient visibility intrusion and aesthetic degradation. She even started a petition. The header read, Protect our view, stop the fence. She walked door to door, told neighbors I was erecting an aggressive barrier to shut out the community, claimed I was planning to build a watchtower, said I had installed floodlights aimed at their homes. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. Because Karen didn't need facts. She needed fear. People started looking at me differently. The man who used to sell eggs and firewood was now that guy with the fence. A few folks turned cold. One neighbor stopped letting their kids play near the hill. I heard whispers about zoning changes and HOA expansion, rumors that Karen had connections and was going to push for annexation of my land for safety. One afternoon, someone dumped garbage over the fence. Bags of lawn clippings, plastic cups, beer cans. Just enough to send a message. I installed a camera. Not long after, I caught Karen standing at the fence again. Alone this time, hands on her hips, staring like she could will the wood to disappear. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't know the camera picked up audio, either. She muttered, "Ugly thing. Spoils everything." Then she pulled out her phone. "Yeah," she said. "I want it gone. I don't care what we have to file." That was it. I was done playing nice. Some people fight dirty. Others fight loud. I prefer to fight documented. I spent 3 weeks gathering everything. Survey maps, land patents, deeds going back to 1946. I even dug through my grandfather's hand-drawn plat lines, still folded in a leather binder under the floorboards of the old barn office. Every time Karen added a new laminated notice, I added another page to my file. She wanted a war over the fence? Fine, let's talk land. The more I dug, the more I found. My grandfather hadn't just bought the pasture and the house plot. He'd bought the ridgeline behind it, and a strip that ran down the slope toward what was now Silver Ridge Estates. A long, narrow finger of land too steep to build on back then, but still part of the legal parcel. It included the ridge, and a 20-foot wide shelf that ran right behind Karen's house. You know what sat directly on that shelf? Her garden, her fire pit, and part of a trail she'd generously extended to the neighborhood to connect them with nature. That entire view she screamed about me ruining? She was looking up at land I already owned, and standing on it, too. I drove down to the county office with a folder under my arm and asked for the zoning supervisor. Her name was Leah. Sharp, no nonsense, the kind of person who reads footnotes and enjoys it. "I need to confirm boundary enforcement on a disputed easement," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "What problem?" I nodded. "Silver Ridge." I nodded again. She sighed. "Figures." We laid the maps out on her desk. She compared old surveys, plat books, and the new GIS overlay. "You're not wrong," she said. "That ridge line is yours. All the way across." She leaned in, tracing her finger. "And this fire pit here? That's about 6 feet over the line. Want to guess who built it?" She smirked. "Karen." Bingo. I filed a formal complaint that day. Not to harass, not to retaliate, but to force clarity. I attached images of the property line, drone footage showing the ridge, and documentation proving I'd never ceded an easement. I highlighted the trail she'd carved, the benches she installed, the raised beds with the little HOA plaques. Every single one of them sitting on land that belonged to me. Next, I sent a letter to the HOA board. Respectful, polite, to whom it may concern. Please be advised that multiple structures maintained by your organization and its members, including a stone fire pit, landscaping features, and an informal walking path, have been identified as encroachments on Parcel 17R, which is privately owned by myself and not part of the Silver Ridge subdivision. These encroachments were not granted by easement or agreement, and no request for access was ever submitted or approved. I request immediate removal of all structures within 30 days or will pursue a formal notice of trespass with the county assessor. Kindly see attached maps and documents confirming legal ownership. Sincerely, my name, legal owner, Parcel 17R. They didn't respond, not in words. But 2 days later, Karen showed up again. This time, she didn't come alone. She brought a lawyer, or someone who claimed to be one. Young guy, Tansut, clipboard and too much gel. He introduced himself as representing the interests of the Silver Ridge Board. I invited him up to the barn office, poured 2 cups of coffee, and laid out the documents like poker cards. He shuffled through the pages, muttering, "Did they not know this was your land?" "They assumed," I said. "Big mistake." He cleared his throat. "Look, I think we can resolve this peacefully. No need for court filings." Karen is enthusiastic but well-meaning. She built a fire pit on private land and hosted board meetings next to it. He went quiet. I sipped my coffee, then added, and she filed 5 separate complaints against my fence, all of them invalid. all of them under HOA codes that don't apply to my parcel. He nodded slowly. Understood. I smiled. I'd like a public acknowledgement of boundary violation. A formal letter clearing all violations from your files. And removal of the structures. Immediately. That might be difficult. Then I'll put up a billboard. He blinked. Excuse me. I leaned forward. On my land. At the top of the ridge. 10 feet tall. White letters. Black background. Private land. Trespassing HOA not welcome. Maybe include a QR code to the GIS survey. He swallowed. I'll speak with the board. They scheduled a public meeting. Open to homeowners. HOA members. Curious neighbors. And I showed up. Not to gloat. Not to threaten. Just to inform. I brought my file. And I brought a poster board. On it, a blown-up satellite image with color-coded property lines. Mine in green. HOA boundaries in red. Karen's house, sitting a breath away from the line. Her garden, squarely on it. The trail, sprawled across it like a trail of breadcrumbs straight to a trespassing lawsuit. I let them all see it. I walked them through it one step at a time. Then I handed the microphone back to the board president, a man who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 2 weeks, and stepped back. Karen didn't speak. Not a word. She sat 3 rows back, arms crossed, lips tight, face pale. Someone in the crowd asked if the fire pit would be moved. Someone else asked if Karen had lied. Then a woman in the back stood up and said what everyone was thinking. You picked a fight over a fence, and you didn't even know whose land you were looking at. Karen got up and left. The next morning, the fire pit was gone. The garden beds were moved. A crew came in and reseeded the trail. They didn't knock. They didn't say a word. They just cleaned up and got out. 2 days later, I got a letter. Not from Karen. From the board. Dear property owner, on behalf of the Silver Ridge HOA, we apologize for any actions taken that infringed on your property rights. The structures in question have been removed, and no further enforcement actions will be attempted on your parcel. We have updated our maps and records accordingly. Sincerely, Silver Ridge HOA Board. Short, polite, and exactly what I needed. I laminated it, tacked it to the inside of the barn, and then I built something new. Not a billboard, not a watchtower, just a small wooden sign at the trailhead where Karen's path used to begin. It said, Private Ridgeline. Respect the fence. Respect the land. Or lose the view. And just beneath that, in smaller letters. Owned since 1946, the fence didn't go anywhere. It still stands. Every post, every line, every knot of barbed wire. Not to intimidate, not to provoke, but to remind anyone who looks past it that land has lines, and those lines mean something. After the fire pit disappeared and the complaints stopped, the mountain quieted. No more laminated notices. No more strangers pacing my tree line with clipboards and measuring wheels. Even the drone, Karen's favorite passive-aggressive scout, stopped buzzing overhead. I heard Karen step down from the HOA board for personal reasons. Her house is still there. So is her garden, now moved closer to her patio, far from any disputed ground. I haven't spoken to her since the meeting, and she hasn't spoken to me. But I notice now, when she walks her dog past the fence line, she doesn't look up, and she doesn't linger. I took a few weeks after it all ended to reset the ridge. I repainted the survey markers in clear, weatherproof paint. Posted proper signage, not aggressive, just firm. Private property. No unauthorized access. I didn't want another community trail cutting through without consent. But I didn't shut it all off either. One neighbor, an older gentleman named Cliff, approached me one afternoon, hat in hand. He'd lived down the slope for years, kept to himself mostly, but said he used to hike that ridgeline back before the HOA formed. Didn't know that was yours, he said. Used to bring my grandson up there to look for fossils. You're welcome to it, I said, so long as folks ask. He grinned. Not everyone needs a board vote to do the right thing. After that, I put up one more sign, just off the back path, hand-painted in green letters. Private Ridgeline, entry by permission only. Ask respect, enjoy. It wasn't about power. It was about principle. You don't need a committee to understand basic decency. Just a little honesty and a little humility. Karen had none of that. But not everyone is Karen. Funny thing is, the fence that caused all the outrage, People started admiring it. A few neighbors asked who built it. One even offered to hire me to help put one up along his property line, not to block the view, he said with a smile, just to remind folks where the view ends. It turned into a quiet symbol, something that didn't just say, "This is mine," but "I care enough to draw the line." In a world where everyone wants more access, more control, more say in things that don't belong to them, sometimes the most radical act is knowing when to say no and meaning it. I didn't build this life to fight people. I built it to live with integrity, to honor the land my grandfather saw value in when nobody else did, to protect the hills that carried his sweat and now carry mine, to make peace not just with silence, but with the kind of strength that doesn't ask for attention. So when people ask me why I didn't just back down, why I didn't take the fence down to be neighborly, why I didn't let the HOA have their little trail or their little view, I tell them this, because the land may look like scenery to them, but to me, it's legacy, and legacy isn't for lease. Moral? You don't own a view. You don't control nature. And if you try to steal someone's silence, you better be ready for the echo.